Hi, I'm Steffany Strange. Want to hear something scary?
Hello there, I hope you're excited as I am now that we have new videos on the first Tuesday of every month. And we're hoping that we can bring back the weekly videos very, very soon. In addition, I'll be doing email submissions from you guys and making videos out of them on the second week of the month. And I'll be doing monthly live streams again on the last week of every month. When there's not a new video, we'll be doing compilations from our incredible archive of the scariest stories from around the world, so we hope you enjoy.
A broken body, bloodied and bruised, laid on its back. Its limbs were bent in unnatural angles. 60 students circled around him, confused and whispering. What could have been responsible? What could have caused so much damage? It was not what Aaron Klein, a sophomore college, nor the other kids from Oklahoma State expected to find in the woods near the annual bonfire. But there, Aaron was, stiff and cold. His poor girlfriend, Carmela, threw herself on top of his corpse, veering between panic and shock. The police had to drag her off. For weeks, detectives investigated the murder. Carmela called every day only to find that at the end of the first week, they were closing the case. When she arrived at the precinct, ready to protest, they told her new evidence pointed to an animal attack. She refused to believe it. They showed her photos of Aaron's body once it had been cleaned and autopsied. Besides lacerations and broken bones, there were bruising that took a couple of days to show up. It revealed what looked like hoof marks all over on his torso and chest. But what kind of animal could do all of that? The detectives left her to process. Not convinced, Carmela grabbed the files and bolted out the door. She would find out who really murdered her boyfriend herself. Rushing over to her best friend Dia's dorm room, she laid out the paperwork and begged for help. Attempting to console her friend, Dia began looking through the file, occasionally reading interviews with other students. Dia snuck a peek at Carmela and quickly tried to hide the papers. Carmela ripped the file from Dia. It was an account from a girlfriend named Piper, who claimed she had been hooking up with Aaron for months. After rummaging through the stacks of paper, she found more. Evie, Mallory, and Journey were all claiming Aaron had sent them creepy DMs. The detective's chicken scratch noted that Aaron was a player whose girlfriend had no clue. Carmela choked back a sob. Then she noticed another scribble. This saying the cause of death was internal bleeding caused by blunt force from an animal or unknown entity. Dia held Carmela as she wept. Then Dia spoke. Aaron was a creep. It was tragic, but maybe this was the only way. Carmela glared at her friend. She shook as she announced she was going to the woods to find whatever animal hurt Aaron and would kill it herself, and she ran out of the dorm room. And Dia followed after her. Carmela entered the clearing where Aaron's body had been discovered. Using the light from her cell phone, she looked around. The bush behind her began to shake. She turned around and the flash illuminated what had happened to a 10-foot tall animal, something between a deer and a human. It towered over her on two legs. Terrified, Carmela chucked her cell phone as hard as she could, hitting the animal square in the face. It shook its head in pain and ran off. Carmela gave chase, this time moving slower without the help of her light, but trying to follow its sound. She stopped abruptly, realizing it was silent. She inched forward slowly, then bang. She bumped into something solid. Dia? She asked in surprise. Dia handed Carmela her phone. As Carmela filled her in, she shone her flashlight and gasped. Dia's nose was broken and bleeding. Carmela slowly began to piece it all together. And she started to back away. Shaking her head, Dia grabbed her arm, forcing her to look down where Dia's hooves were slowly transforming back to human feet. Carmela, in shock, backed up further, falling to the ground. I warned you about him, Dia said. I asked him multiple times to stop with the others or to break up with you. He just laughed. That night, I caught him with Piper in the woods. I did it to protect you." "But what did you do to his body?" Carmela stammered, reliving the horrific image. "Once I shapeshift, there's no going back. Aaron would have told, and then how would I protect you?" Dia asked. Carmela jumped up and ran toward the school security office. Dia let her go, trailing behind her, knowing she was caught. The security guard opened the door to a distraught Carmela, claiming she knew what had happened to Aaron Klein. The security guard sat her down and asked for details. Carmela looked back at Dia, who was standing outside. Carmela tried to tell the officer about a 10-foot deer and how Aaron lied. And then, all of a sudden, Carmela thought about all the times that Aaron would show up late, and all these memories started flooding back. When the guard asked if there was anything Carmela wanted to add, she looked back at Dia, the friend who only wanted to look after her. "No," she said. "I just thought you should know, so you could keep people out of the woods." Carmela leaned over to embrace Dia. Both their bodies heaved with tears.
Miley worked at a coffee and cronuts. She was looking up at the counter when her new coworker, Arenas, walked in. Despite Arenas barely uttering a word her entire shift, Miley was thrilled to be working with anyone besides her boss, Chaz. And Arenas seemed to be catching on quickly and focused on getting her work done. Miley was happy to see Richardson, her favorite customer, come through the door. Every day, he ordered the same black coffee and paid for it with a detailed drawing on a napkin. "I love it," said Miley as she stared at the image of a woman with snakes for hair, bat-like wings, and bloody tears streaming down her face. "That's a fury," Richardson said. Miley pinned it behind her on a corkboard covered in dozens of Richardson's other mythical illustrations. He struck Miley as socially awkward, but his art was amazing. "Furies are deities of vengeance," he continued. "They have to be summoned in order to punish someone. They lash them to death with studded whips." Miley smiled at his colorful imagination, but before she had time to think any more about it, Chaz walked in. "Guess what? I'm being made general manager," he said. Miley's stomach sank, as did her smile. There were already complaints about Chaz from other employees. 3 had quit in the last month due to his temper. Miley had already dodged his anger and his petty outbursts. But now she and Arenas were the only ones left. Arenas was quiet and new and would be harder for Chaz to bully. Miley knew she would be his next target. And it didn't take long. If Miley was running late, he'd shove warning papers in her face. He told her to quit school because this is as far up the corporate ladder she'd get. One night, he berated her in front of customers. Arenas just looked away. Finally, one night after they closed up, Miley was in the office counting the drawer and Arenas swept the floor. Chaz entered the office and locked the door. Within seconds, he flew into a tirade, knocking money to the floor. He shouted she was useless and couldn't even count. He pushed Miley out of the way, knocking her to the floor. She crawled out as fast as she could and ran outside past Arenas, crying. Arenas ran for her purse, and that's when Chaz came up from behind her, grinning. He grabbed her face. "Are you gonna be trouble, too?" he yelled. He then jumped back. Blood streamed down her face. She was actually crying tears of blood. She smirked as she saw his fear. He watched as his eyes saw her back begin to widen, like something was trying to break free from under her sweater. She lunged at him, digging one hand into his arm so hard it made him cry out. With the other, she grabbed what she was looking for in her purse, a whip with metal spikes. Chaz froze, unable to defend himself as he stared at her, mesmerized
as her hair appeared to dance. Arenas hissed as she began to lash him. The first one knocked him to the ground, but the ninth, all the flesh on his torso had been ripped up. He was barely hanging on. She towered over him, hair now snakes, her shoulders huge wings behind her. With one last heave, the spikes flung straight into his skull, killing him instantly. The next morning, cop cars surrounded the place. Miley had been called into to answer some questions. Dozens of regulars waited outside trying to peer in, but all anyone could see was blood spatter on the windows and a body covered with a sheet on the floor. Miley stood in shock, surveying the carnage. She asked the police officer who was on the floor, fearing it was Arenas. The cop informed her it was an unidentified male. He asked if she had access to the security cameras, so she pulled out her iPad to pull up the footage, but something told her to watch it before sharing it with the police. Her face turned pale and she began to tremble. Richardson walked out of the crowd to comfort her. He explained she had seemed like she needed help, and he hoped it was okay that he had called for her to punish Chaz. As the cop approached, Miley paused. Before he could see, she deleted the file. She claimed the cameras hadn't recorded anything, and she never mentioned Arenas. Miley felt bad for lying to the police, but Chaz had deserved it. Richardson had known it too, as real friends always do.
Mio's eyes flew open as she gasped for air. She didn't know why she was outside on the ground, surrounded by emergency workers, or how she even got there. She looked and saw the book titled Socken, meaning gold dust, and that's when everything came flooding back. Mio had always been different, or according to her father, a disappointment who worked in a coffee shop. She had just graduated from Osaka University and was supposed to be headed to medical school, but she never really cared about helping people. Instead, Mio longed to become a successful poet. She took a job as a barista so she could make ends meet while pursuing her dreams. After going through tons of books in the library, she headed to the desk to check them out. The librarian scanned each book, then came to a sudden halt as she held up a collection of poetry titled Socken. "Where did you find this?" she asked in surprise. It wasn't supposed to be on the shelf. The librarian told Mio it was not to be borrowed. The book contained a cursed poem called Tomino's Hell. Anyone who read it or heard the poem out loud suffered terribly, often fatally. The famous director Suji Terayama had made a movie based on the poem and had then died young. Some blamed his sudden death on the curse. The panicked librarian set the book aside while the librarian helped the next customer. Mio snatched the forbidden book from the counter and headed to work. Asuka, Mio's manager, called her out for being late again, but she paid no mind to her manager. Instead, began to daydream, eventually rhyming words, dancing through her head as she went through the motions of making mocha macchiatos. She snapped back to reality quickly when Asuka posted a sign that read, "Open Mic Night." Mio decided this was her chance to sign up and recite a poem she had in her journal. As she flipped through her journal, she began to have second thoughts. Instead, she figured she would look for inspiration in other books she had. The next day, Mio told Asuka she wouldn't be performing her poem. Asuka laughed, saying she knew Mio would bail. Asuka chuckled at her with that mockingbird screech. Her face lit up with joy at her employee's expense. It was in that moment that Mio snapped back and said, "Actually, I am going to read a poem, just not my own." When it was her turn, she pulled out the forbidden book she'd stolen from the library. She finally read Tomino's poem. It was as dark and twisted as she hoped, and it strangely comforted her. The story of Tomino's descending into hell resonated with her deeply. She felt herself spiraling towards darkness, questioning if she'd chosen the right path in life. Tomino's hell,
Elder sister vomits blood, younger sister breathing fire, while sweet little Tomino just spits up the jewels. All alone does Tomino go, falling into that hell. The poem was gruesome, not to Asuka's taste, and she turned quickly to go into the kitchen, not realizing she knocked over a candle. Mio continued. A hell of utter darkness, without even flowers. Is Tomino's big sister the one who whips him? The purpose of scourging hangs dark in his mind, lashing and thrashing him. Mio saw a flame out of the corner of her eye. In the back, a tablecloth was on fire. But with all eyes on her, she didn't want to pass up the attention. With a smile, Mio read on. Into the blackest of hells, guide him now, I pray. When her audience finally smelled the smoke, they bolted towards the exits, but the route to the front door was covered in flames. The side door had been locked to keep anyone from sneaking into the open mic night. Asuka's fingernails tore and bled from clawing at it, trying to get out, but they were all trapped. Despite the blood-curdling screams and the flames closing in, Mio kept reading. She was determined to finish the cursed poem. And that was the last thing she remembered, before waking up disoriented outside the smoking cafe, realizing she had been rescued by a firefighter. She saw Asuka's dead, burnt body laying close by, covered in ash. Mio couldn't help but wonder if the curse was real. Now that was poetic justice. Mio figured she would find out for sure when she read the poem again at the next open mic night.
Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.